The kingdom of Grantford stood as a testament to power and prosperity. Its sprawling towns and noble estates nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. At its heart rose the royal palace, a magnificent blend of regal grandeur and North American architectural influence, with tall stone towers and wide wooden halls that spoke of both old-world authority and frontier resilience. King Nathaniel Grant ruled this land with an iron fist wrapped in velvet. His reign had brought wealth to the nobility, but cast long shadows over the common folk. The king's decrees grew more oppressive with each passing season. Taxes doubled, land seized without cause, and dissenters silenced with swift punishment. In taverns and market squares, whispers of discontent spread like wildfire, though none dared speak openly against the crown. Prince Jonathan Grant walked a precarious line between loyalty to his father and compassion for his future subjects. Tall and broad-shouldered like his father, but with his late mother's gentle eyes, the prince had earned the people's admiration through small acts of kindness and justice when his father wasn't watching. Stories circulated of the prince intervening in unfair arrests or distributing food from the royal stores during harsh winters. Unlike the king, Jonathan listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words carried the weight of genuine conviction. In the shadows of the royal household moved Amelia Wells, a servant whose quiet dignity belied her humble station, with chestnut hair often escaping its practical braid, and eyes that missed nothing. Amelia navigated the treacherous waters of palace life with uncommon grace. Though she wore the simple grey dress of royal staff, she carried herself with the poise of someone who knew her own worth beyond titles and bloodlines. The air in Grantford hung heavy with unspoken tension, a kingdom holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable storm that would either wash away the old order or drown them all in its fury.
The royal council chamber buzzed with tension as nobles in fine silks and villagers in worn woolens stood shoulder to shoulder, awaiting the king's judgment. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the ornate throne, where King Nathaniel sat with practiced indifference, his jeweled fingers drumming against the carved armrest. "Next case," announced the royal herald, his voice echoing against stone walls adorned with the Grant family crest, a lion clutching a crown. A widow named Sarah Blackwood stepped forward, her weathered hands clutching a rolled parchment. Though her clothes were simple, her spine remained straight as she addressed the king. "Your Majesty, I come seeking justice. The land my husband farmed for 30 years, land granted us by your own father, has been seized for the crown. These documents prove our rightful ownership." King Nathaniel barely glanced at the parchment when presented. "The Northern Territories require redistribution for the kingdom's security. Your claim is outdated. The crown reclaims what it once gave." From his position beside the throne, Prince Jonathan's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, breaking protocol. "I've reviewed these documents myself. The Blackwood claim is legitimate, under our own laws." A ripple of murmurs swept through the chamber. The king's eyes narrowed dangerously. "The law is what I declare it to be," King Nathaniel replied, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Then perhaps the law requires revision," Jonathan countered, loud enough for all to hear. "We cannot build a secure kingdom by destroying the security of its people." The chamber fell silent. Even the royal guards shifted uncomfortably. "You forget yourself, Prince," the king hissed. "When you wear this crown, you may dispense justice as you see fit. Until then, remember your place." Jonathan stood his ground. "My place is between the people and injustice, even when that injustice wears a crown." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Elder nobles exchanged meaningful glances, while younger courtiers watched with barely concealed excitement. The confrontation had been building for months, but never had the prince so openly challenged his father's authority. "The widow's land remains with the crown," King Nathaniel declared, rising from his throne. "And my son will spend the week reflecting on the meaning of loyalty in the Eastern Tower." As guards moved to escort the prince away, Jonathan locked eyes with the widow. "Justice delayed is not justice denied," he said clearly. "I give you my word." The widow bowed her head, a single tear tracking down her weathered cheek. But in that tear gleamed something Grantford hadn't seen in years: hope. As the council session ended, Whispers spread through the castle and beyond. The prince had finally taken a stand.
The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the palace courtyard, where nobles and servants alike gathered for the king's birthday celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of exotic foods, while musicians played cheerful melodies that contrasted sharply with the underlying tension. King Nathaniel held court from a raised platform, his crown glinting in the sunlight, as he accepted tributes and flattery with practiced grace. Prince Jonathan stood nearby, his punishment in the Eastern Tower having ended days ago, though the distance between father and son remained vast and frigid. A young servant girl, named Lily, no more than 16, approached the king's table with a silver pitcher of chilled wine. As she leaned to fill his goblet, a nobleman's elbow knocked against her arm. The pitcher tilted, sending a splash of deep red liquid across the king's pristine white sleeve. The music stopped. The courtyard fell silent. "Clumsy wretch," King Nathaniel roared, rising to his feet. "You dare soil your king?" "Please, your majesty," the girl stammered, falling to her knees. "It was an accident. 20 lashes," the king declared coldly. "And afterward, she will kneel here in the sun until sunset, as an example to all who served the crown carelessly." Prince Jonathan pushed through the stunned crowd. "Father, she's a child. The fault wasn't hers. I saw what happened." "Then perhaps you need another lesson in respecting authority," the king replied. "Guards, proceed with the punishment." As 2 guards dragged the sobbing girl toward the whipping post, murmurs of discontent rippled through the gathering. Even loyal nobles looked away, uncomfortable with such disproportionate cruelty. "This is madness," Jonathan said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "We are meant to protect those who serve us, not terrorize them." The first lash fell. The girl's scream cut through the courtyard like a knife. Jonathan moved to intervene, but 4 royal guards blocked his path. From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of Amelia Wells, her face pale with horror, as she watched from among the servants. "Remember this moment," King Nathaniel told his son, as the punishment continued. "A king who cannot control his servants soon finds he cannot control his kingdom." But as the people watched their prince strain against the guards, his face twisted with helpless rage and compassion, many wondered which man truly understood what it meant to rule. If you're feeling the weight of injustice in Grantford, don't forget to like and subscribe to follow Prince Jonathan's fight for justice and love. The palace gardens at midnight offered rare privacy in a world of watchful eyes. Prince Jonathan waited beneath an ancient oak, its sprawling branches creating shadows within shadows. When Amelia appeared, moving silently along the hidden path they'd established over months of secret meetings, his face softened in a way it never did in public. "I was beginning to think you couldn't come," he said, taking her hands in his. "The Queen required additional attention tonight," Amelia replied. "She suspects something, Jonathan. The way she watches me." Moonlight filtered through leaves, illuminating their forbidden tableau. The crown prince and the servant, separated by an unbridgeable chasm of birth and station, yet drawn together by something neither could deny. "Let her suspect," Jonathan said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I'm tired of pretending." Amelia touched his cheek gently. "Pretending keeps us safe. My father sees enemies everywhere, and love nowhere," he interrupted. "I won't let him dictate this too." In the servants' quarters, whispers traveled from bed to bed, like a current. "The prince meets her in the gardens," a kitchen maid confided to her companion. "Cook's nephew saw them embracing near the old oak." "The king will have her head if he discovers it," came the worried reply. "Or worse," added an older servant. "Remember what happened to Lady Catherine, when the king desired her but she favoured another." The rumours weren't confined to servants. In the noble quarters, Lady Eleanor Blackwood, the ambitious daughter of the Duke of Westmere, paced her chambers furiously. "A servant girl," she spat to her lady's maid. "I've spent 3 years positioning myself as the future queen, and he sneaks off with a girl who empties chamber pots. What will you do, my lady?" Lady Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The king should know where his son's loyalties lie, don't you think?" Meanwhile, King Nathaniel observed more than anyone realized. During a state dinner, his gaze lingered on Amelia as she served wine, noting how his son's eyes followed her movements with poorly disguised affection. "The Wells girl," he remarked casually to his steward. Later, "She seems competent. Perhaps she should be moved to my personal household staff." The steward, understanding the implication, nodded nervously. "As you wish, Your Majesty." That night, Jonathan pulled Amelia into an alcove as she carried linens through the eastern corridor. "My father has requested you for his personal staff," he whispered urgently. "You must refuse." Fear flashed across Amelia's face. "No servant refuses the king." "What does he know?" "I don't know. But I recognize the pattern. He takes what others value, not for want of it himself, but to demonstrate his power." Amelia leaned her forehead against his chest. "Then we must be more careful." "Or what?" "Or, we must be prepared to risk everything," she whispered, "because he will never simply let us be." As they parted, neither noticed the shadow that detached itself from a nearby column. Lady Eleanor, her discovery complete, her revenge now inevitable.
Chaos erupted in the royal dining hall as King Nathaniel clutched his throat, his face contorting in pain. The goblet he'd been drinking from clattered to the floor, spilling dark red wine across the marble like blood. "The king is poisoned," shouted Lord Westmere, pointing dramatically at Amelia, who stood frozen with the wine pitcher still in her hands. "Seize the servant girl." Guards surrounded Amelia before she could speak. Prince Jonathan leapt to his feet, knocking over his chair. "This is absurd," he declared, placing himself between the guards and Amelia. "She's served in this household for years without incident." Queen Catherine, typically silent during court matters, spoke up from her seat. "The girl poured his wine, Jonathan. No one else touched it." "Then I should be equally affected," Jonathan argued, grabbing his own goblet and draining it in one defiant swallow. "We drank from the same pitcher." The king's breathing steadied somewhat, though his face remained flushed. "Perhaps," he rasped, "the poison was meant only for me. Perhaps it was in the cup, not the wine. Or perhaps," Jonathan countered, "there was no poison at all. Father has suffered from stomach pains for months. His physicians can confirm it." Lord Westmere stepped forward, his daughter Eleanor hovering at his side. "Your Majesty, I've received troubling reports about this servant girl. She's been seen in compromising situations. Perhaps her loyalties have been divided." The implication hung heavy in the air. The king's eyes narrowed as they shifted between his son and Amelia. "Is this true?" he demanded. Amelia finally found her voice. "I have served the royal family faithfully, Your Majesty. I would never harm you or bring dishonor to this household." "She speaks the truth," Jonathan insisted. "Your defense of a mere servant seems excessive, my son," the king observed coldly. "Unless Lord Westmere's insinuations have merit." The queen studied Amelia's face, then her son's, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Nathaniel," she began cautiously, "perhaps we should investigate before making accusations." "The girl will be imprisoned until the truth is determined," King Nathaniel declared, rising shakily to his feet. "And my son will remember that a future king's heart is a political instrument, not a personal indulgence." As guards led Amelia away, she maintained her dignity, back straight and head high. Only Jonathan saw the fear in her eyes, and the silent plea for him to be careful. "This isn't over," he promised his father once the hall had cleared. "If she's harmed in any way, you'll answer to me." The king laughed, though it ended in a pained cough. Bold words from a prince who forgets he serves at my pleasure. "No, father," Jonathan replied quietly. "I serve Grantford. Perhaps it's you who has forgotten the difference." The king's private study felt more like a battlefield than a room, as father and son faced each other across an ornate desk. Maps of Grantford covered the walls, territories marked, resources noted, all under the control of one man's pen. "You will publicly denounce any connection to the servant girl," King Nathaniel commanded, his voice deceptively calm. "You will announce your betrothal to Lady Eleanor at tomorrow's council meeting." Jonathan stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. "I will do neither." "You defy me now? After everything?" "I defy injustice," Jonathan replied. "Amelia is innocent, and I will not marry to satisfy your political alliances." The king slammed his fist on the desk. "Lord Westmere controls the eastern provinces. His support can be earned through fair governance, not by selling your son." Jonathan interrupted. "The old alliances are failing because you rule through fear rather than respect." King Nathaniel's face darkened. "You know nothing of ruling, nothing of the sacrifices required. I know that Lord Harrington supports me because I saved his daughter from false imprisonment. I know that Baron Caldwell pledges his forces to me because I ensured his people received grain during last winter's shortage. Grain you would have exported for profit." The king's eyes widened slightly. "You've been building support behind my back." "I've been building relationships based on justice and mutual benefit," Jonathan corrected. "Concepts that seem foreign to you. You would turn my own nobles against me? My own son?" "You did that yourself," Jonathan said quietly. "I merely offered an alternative." King Nathaniel circled the desk, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I could have you imprisoned for treason." "You could," Jonathan agreed. "But how many more would rise in my place? The people are tired, father. Lord Westmere isn't the only one who can mobilize forces." Their eyes locked in silent battle, the old lion sensing, perhaps for the first time, that his cub had grown teeth. The stroke came without warning during a heated council meeting. One moment, King Nathaniel was berating his treasurer over declining tax revenues. The next, his words slurred, his right side went slack, and he collapsed into his throne, one hand clutching weakly at his chest. The council chamber erupted in panic. Guards rushed forward while nobles backed away, as if illness might be contagious as treason. Only Prince Jonathan moved with purpose, calling for the royal physician, while loosening his father's collar. "Clear the room," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Give him air." Within hours, the news spread throughout Grantford like wildfire. The king had fallen, not by assassin's blade or rebel's arrow, but by his own body's rebellion. The royal physician emerged from the king's chambers with a grave expression, pulling Prince Jonathan aside. "The left side of his body remains paralyzed," he explained quietly. "His speech is affected. He drifts in and out of consciousness. I've seen this before in men who drive themselves too hard, whose anger burns too hot for too long." "Will he recover?" Jonathan asked. The physician hesitated. "Partially, perhaps. But he will never again be the man he was." In the days that followed, the palace atmosphere transformed. Courtiers who had scurried like mice under the king's gaze now walked with uncertain freedom. Guards who had enforced the king's harsh edicts looked to the prince for direction. The machine of governance, so long driven by one man's will, sputtered and hesitated. Jonathan established himself in the council chamber, not on his father's throne, but at the head of the table, signaling partnership rather than absolute rule. Queen Catherine, long sidelined in matters of state, joined these meetings, offering insights that surprised many with their wisdom. In the town below, people gathered in marketplaces and taverns, speculating on what would come next. Some feared chaos, others dared to hope for change. "The old king still breathes," cautioned an elder in the town square. "And while he breathes, his power remains." "But the prince sits in council," argued a younger voice. "And those who were imprisoned for speaking against the king, they're being released." Like a forest after a long winter, Grantford began to thaw, uncertain whether spring or another freeze would follow. 3 weeks after King Nathaniel's collapse, the royal physician delivered the news that changed everything. The king, though alive, would never again be fit to rule. With the queen's blessing and the council's unanimous vote, Prince Jonathan was named regent, with full powers of the crown. His first official act set the tone for what would follow. Standing on the palace steps before a crowd that stretched to the horizon, Jonathan declared an end to the land seizures that had displaced so many. Grantford was built not by one family, but by generations of farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, and servants, whose labor and loyalty created everything we value, he announced, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "From this day forward, all lands unjustly seized will be returned to their rightful owners, with compensation for losses suffered." The crowd's response began as a murmur and swelled to a roar that shook the palace windows. In that moment, Something shifted in the collective consciousness of Grandford, fear giving way to cautious hope. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan worked tirelessly, often seen riding through villages with minimal escort, listening more than speaking. He established a new council that included not only nobles, but representatives from the merchant guilds, farming communities, and even the servant class. My father believed that power must be hoarded to be preserved, he explained during a particularly contentious council meeting. I believe power shared is power strengthened. Not all welcomed these changes. Several noble houses, particularly those who had benefited most under the old king's rule, whispered of resistance. Lord Westmere withdrew to his eastern estate, his daughter Eleanor with him, their ambitions thwarted but not abandoned. Yet for each voice of dissent, dozens more spoke in support. The royal treasury, which had been depleted by the king's excesses, began to recover as fair taxation replaced punitive levies. Trade flourished as merchants no longer feared arbitrary seizure of their goods. Most significantly, Jonathan ordered a complete review of the dungeons and prison camps where his father had sent those who oppose him. Hundreds were released, returning to their families with stories that transformed the regent from a symbol of hope to one of justice. Sarah Blackwood, the widow whose land dispute had sparked Jonathan's first public stand against his father, was invited to the palace. There, before the full council, she received not only the deed to her land, but an appointment as magistrate for her region. Your courage in seeking justice despite the personal risk serves as an example to us all, Jonathan told her. Grandford needs such courage in its leadership. As autumn painted the kingdom in gold and crimson, Jonathan stood at his father's bedside. The once mighty king was diminished, his powerful frame wasted, his imperious voice reduced to halting whispers, yet his eyes remained sharp, following his son's movements with a mixture of resentment and something harder to define. They call you king already, Nathaniel managed, the words slurred but intelligible. They call me just, Jonathan corrected gently, and that is worth more than any crown. Winter's first snow dusted Grandford like powdered sugar, transforming the kingdom into a glittering wonderland. In the palace great hall, fires roared in massive hearts as nobles, merchants, craftspeople, and farmers gathered for an unprecedented announcement. Jonathan, now officially crowned as King Jonathan I, after his father's peaceful passing in his sleep, stood before his assembled subjects. He wore a simpler crown than his father's gold intertwined with silver, lacking ostentation, but not dignity. Today marks not only my formal ascension, he declared, but a new chapter for Grandford itself. A kingdom is only as strong as the bonds between its people, all its people. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as palace guards opened the massive doors. Amelia Wells entered, no longer in servant's gray but in a simple gown of deep blue that matched the new king's ceremonial robes. She walked with quiet confidence, her eyes never leaving Jonathan's. Many of you know Amelia Wells, Jonathan continued, as she took her place beside him. Some knew her as a servant, in this very palace. I know her as the woman who taught me that true nobility comes not from birth, but from character. He took her hand in his. Today, I ask her to teach that lesson to all of Grandford, as my wife and your queen. The hall erupted, some in shock, others in jubilation. Amelia's eyes shimmered with unshed trees, as she faced the kingdom that had once seen her as invisible. I accept, she said, her clear voice carrying to every corner. Not for the crown, but for the chance to serve Grandford in building something new. A kingdom where birth determines neither one's worth nor one's possibilities. As Jonathan placed a ring upon her finger, the first commoner queen in Grandford's history smiled up at him with a love that had survived imprisonment, intrigue, and the weight of tradition. Outside the palace walls, bells rang throughout the kingdom, their joyful pealing carrying news of the betrothal to the farthest villages. In town squares and farmhouses, people raised toasts to the new king and his unexpected queen. To King Jonathan and Queen Amelia, they cheered. May their reign be long and their justice unwavering. And across Grandford, for the first time in generations, the future seemed not something to fear, but something to welcome with open arms.
20 years passed like the turning of seasons, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs to Grandford. The kingdom that had once trembled under King Nathaniel's shadow now flourished in the light of his son's more balanced rule. On the anniversary of King Jonathan's coronation, citizens gathered in town squares throughout the land, not by royal decree but by choice, to celebrate the transformation they had witnessed. Children who had never known the old king's cruelty played in streets that were safer and more prosperous than their parents had dared hope. In the royal nursery, Queen Amelia, her beauty matured, but undiminished by the years, watched over their 3 children, Crown Princess Eleanor, named in a gesture of reconciliation toward the noble house that had eventually pledged loyalty to the new regime, Prince Thomas, whose scholarly nature promised a thoughtful advisor to his future queen sister, and young Princess Sarah, named for the widow, whose courage had helped spark a kingdom's change. They will never fully understand what came before, Amelia observed, as Jonathan joined her, silver now threading through his dark hair. How close we came to losing everything. Perhaps that's our greatest achievement, he replied, wrapping an arm around her waist, that they can take justice and compassion for granted, rather than seeing them as revolutionary. From the window of the royal apartments, they could see the monument that had replaced the old whipping post in the palace courtyard, a simple stone fountain where citizens could freely come to draw clean water, inscribed with words that had become Grantford's unofficial motto: "Justice flows like water, nourishing all it touches." The kingdom was not perfect. No human endeavor could be. There had been droughts and disputes, threats from neighboring lands, and the eternal challenge of balancing competing interests. Yet, the foundation laid by a prince who dared defy tyranny, and a servant who dared love a king, had proven remarkably durable. "What do you think your father would say?" Amelia asked softly, "if he could see Grantford now?" Jonathan considered this, watching as their children laughed together over a game of their own invention. "I think he would be surprised to learn that sharing power didn't diminish it, but multiplied it beyond anything he could have imagined." In the distance, the bells of Grantford rang out clear and true, no longer harbingers of fear but messengers of possibility. The sound of a kingdom that had emerged from the crown's shadow into the light of its own making. Join us as King Jonathan and Queen Amelia bring a new era to Grantford. Subscribe and hit the bell to not miss the next chapter of love, hope, and legacy.